Hello, and welcome to the second lecture in the 2023 Legends of Simpson Lecture Series. Today, it's my honor to have with us Simpson legend Owen Duncan as he presents The Past is a Foreign Country, a memoir.
Good afternoon. In 1953, British author L.P. Hartley published The Go-Between, a novel revolving around a protagonist in his 60s, discovering a diary he had written in the summer of 1900 when, as a naive, middle-class 13-year-old, he had visited the wealthy family of a school friend. The diary arouses suppressed memories of his becoming innocently involved as a postman between Mary Ann, the daughter of the aristocratic family, and the farmer Ted, whose affair across forbidden social lines led to tragedy. The novel was well reviewed, translated into more than 10 languages, and inspired a compelling movie starring Julie Christie and Alan Bates in 1971. But the book is most remembered for its striking opening lines. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. So when I was asked to prepare these remarks, I reflected on those lines and thought about my own experience as a young man beginning my professional life at Simpson College in 1969, and my personal reflection on the interaction of history and memory in my own life. I came to Simpson in the fall of '69 as a result of luck and bad geography. Having finished my coursework at Ohio State University, and with a 3-year-old daughter and a wife who wondered if I would ever get a real job, I sat down with the Chronicle of Higher Education and 50 sheets of Ohio State University stationery to apply for every job opening for a historian east of the Mississippi River. Having written 49 letters of application with one sheet of paper left, I came to an ad for Simpson College, a place I had never heard of, nor could I remember whether Iowa was east or west of the Mississippi. With no other openings in the Chronicle, I sent my last application to Simpson and heard nothing back for several months. Then one night in April, I got a call from Joe Walt, chair of the history department, asking if I might like to visit Simpson. In a conversation that lasted nearly an hour and served effectively as an interview, two things became clear to me. If the college flew me to Iowa and offered me the job, I was expected to take it. And if I did take it, we were expected to live in Indianola. And so it was a week later that I came to ride with Joe in his Mercedes, the dark and twisting 2-lane highway that was 65-69, to a place I still knew almost nothing about. But I quickly learned that Simpson was indeed a liberal arts college and becoming more liberal every day. For I found myself ensconced in an apartment in Kresge Hall, at that time a women's dormitory, where the women were raucously celebrating the end of required hours. No longer would they have to be in the dorm room by 10 o'clock. They could have the same freedom as men. And over the next few years, there would be visitation by members of the opposite sex, the relaxation of dorm rules in general. Next would be the elimination of house mothers, whose reason for being, enforcing the rules, had become anachronistic. So it was that my wife, Karen, and I, having left our 3-year-old daughter, Amy, with my parents in West Virginia, found ourselves on the night of July 20th, driving through rural Indiana, looking at a full moon and listening to Neil Armstrong on the radio saying, "One small step for man, one great step for mankind," thus fulfilling the vision of martyred President John F. Kennedy. It seemed to foretell a brighter future, and it seemed to bode favorably for our future at Simpson. The first faculty meeting was memorable for the number of new faculty. Simpson had committed to the idea that 1,200 was the appropriate size for a small liberal arts college, and had hired 17 new faculty to fulfill that commitment and to teach in its rigorous Vital Center program. Almost all the 70 or so faculty was male, and most were wearing coats and ties. When Chaplain Gil Tavener was called upon to open the meeting with prayer, he responded wryly, "I have given up praying for this group." Tavener was from the East Coast, gave witty sermons every Sunday morning to a good-sized student congregation, and was instrumental in eliminating required chapel. He also offered a January term course on films that would not be shown in most neighborhood theaters. Gil was very popular with students, not only for his timely sermons, but for his support for what Joe Walt called the student revolution against the doctrine of in loco parentis that had controlled student life with the college as absentee parents, and in favor of the removal of college restrictions and the encouragement of student participation in the running of the college through student government and membership on faculty committees and attending faculty meetings. I had the privilege of serving on the ironically named Student Affairs Committee, which was made up of 3 students, 3 administrators, and 4 faculty. The students and administrators regularly outvoted the faculty and sent proposals, which I opposed, to the faculty at large, which were invariably voted down. Then I had to get to the business of teaching, and the Simpson curriculum that I had been hired to teach was formidable, both for students and for me. The Vital Center curriculum had been praised by Time magazine for its liberalism and its emphasis upon the interaction of East and West in 2 courses taken during the sophomore year. My friend Bruce Haddix taught the first, called Enduring Questions, which took up those great philosophical questions of the West, but came to have a second ironic meaning of enduring Bruce's incessant questioning of students. The second course, East Meets West, then tried to give students a broader insight into the larger world. But in the freshman year, students had to take both Western civilization and world literature, a course on the history of the fine arts, a foreign language, and a laboratory science, not to mention a required physical education class. Classes met Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, with Thursday set aside for science labs and Western Civ discussions. Courses in majors like education or management had to be put off until second year. There were no teaching assistants in those days, so my Monday, Wednesday, Friday lecture class had nearly 100 students, who then broke into 4 discussion sections on Thursday, all of which were my responsibility. I especially remembered those few enrolled in the 4:30 section, which was brightened by the presence of Susie Lewis, later to become Sagan Lewis and star in the popular medical drama St. Elsewhere. Furthermore, students had a rigorous reading requirement. The main text for the course was Stuart Easton's Western Heritage, which had more than 1,000 pages. In addition, they were required to read Aristotle's Politics, The Mind of Rome, Medieval People, and Machiavelli's The Prince. And I sympathized with them because I had read only The Prince and stayed barely ahead of the students. Clearly, this was not a situation one would expect at a small liberal arts college. So even as I scrambled to keep ahead of the students in my 3 new class preparations, I was also asked as a new faculty member to serve on an ad hoc committee to develop a more reasonable alternative. After 3 months of deliberation, this ad hoc committee presented a proposed distributed studies curriculum to the faculty on February 10, 1970, emphasizing that no single course would be required of all students, and instead they would be required to take 2 courses in the nature of the physical universe, 5 courses in the heritage of man, which was the old required course of the Vital Center, 1 course in the nature of human behavior, and 2 courses in the languages of learning, the language of learning, foreign languages, math, and computer science. In the ensuing debate, several proposals to add requirements led to some agitated discussion. Joe Walt became so concerned that he literally wrote on his knee a substitute amendment that, quote, Simpson College abandon all designated courses and/or distributed requirements, unquote. The response was a shocked approval. An effort to table the motion and send the proposal back to committee failed. A second motion to approve the Walt amendment in principle and send it to the Educational Policy Committee for polishing passed. Thus, the open curriculum was born. To my memory, only 5 faculty opposed the elimination of all liberal arts requirements, and 3 of us, Bruce Haddix, Norm Thomas, and I, sought to save some remnant of a liberal arts program that we had been hired to teach. We argued that a liberal arts college that could not define the liberal arts would send a weak message to students and parents and undermine the reputation of the college. A motion to set the defeated curriculum as guidelines for students, recommended but not required, was overwhelmingly defeated. Later in the semester, the deadline for dropping a course was moved from midterm to the end of the semester, but a proposal to eliminate D and F grades crossed the line and was defeated by the faculty. Thus, the liberation of student life was expanded to the academic program. But of course, the most controversial of student liberation movements was the anti-war campaign. In 1969, the majority of students were under 21 and could not vote, but 18-year-old males would become eligible for the draft if they dropped out or flunked out. And while this could be a life or death matter for students, it also affected the faculty, none of whom wanted to be responsible for a student being drafted because of a low grade. The Simpsonian used its editorial pages to condemn the war, but also complained at the failure of most students to be politically active. And student leaders, most notably Rich Cohen, who later became an Emmy Award-winning journalist with CBS and CNN, and with the support of a number of faculty, organized against the war. See if I can do this. Thank you. We had been on campus for only 6 weeks when the National Vietnam Moratorium was announced for October 15th. Luckily for Simpson organizers, a number of undergraduates were participating as extras in the filming of the movie Cold Turkey in Greenfield. And they managed to get the ear of director Norman Lear and stars Dick Van Dyke and Pippa Scott, who agreed to participate in a pre-moratorium rally on October 8th. Joe Walt writes, attracted by the lineup of celebrities, more than 1,000 spectators from Simpson, Des Moines, Grinnell, and beyond jammed into Hopper Gymnasium to hear one speaker after another call for an end to the war. Everyone seemed proud that Simpson was becoming a liberal beacon, even for students at Grinnell. This was not just a student movement. This was not just a student movement was shown a few days later when the Simpson Board of Trustees issued a resolution opposed to the continuation of the war in Vietnam, the first and only time the board spoke out on a political issue. On the day of the moratorium, on the 15th, Norman Thomas, Joe Walt, and Paul Ingram spoke against the war on campus. Simpson students participated in anti-war rallies in Des Moines, and that evening, Simpson sponsored a Journalism Institute panel discussion on the nature of freedom. But Joe Walt suggested in Under the Whispering Maples, quote, perhaps more moving was the ringing of the chapel bell 39,400 times, one for each American who had given up his life in the Vietnam War. Students intended to be provocative, and not all Indianola residents were happy about it. More concerning was the fact that Simpson radicalism had gained the attention of the FBI. The morning after the pre-moratorium, an FBI agent appeared on campus seeking the identity of student leaders and asking President Ralph John, would you consider the students at the rally loyal to Hanoi or Peking? Outraged, John ordered the agent to leave the campus. He then informed the board and his cabinet of the confrontation with an admonition not to reveal it to anyone. Unfortunately, the story was leaked to the Des Moines Tribune, which headlined its story, Simpson charges FBI with harassment. John had to brave a firestorm of criticism from newspapers across the state, from alumni who threatened to withhold donations to the college, and from the people of Indianola. The Waterloo Courier called the Simpson administration naive. Quote, no loyal American should resent inquiries from the FBI. No loyal American has anything to fear from the FBI, unquote. Our neighbors, whose children played with Amy, forbade their children from walking on the Simpson campus. April brought another national moratorium, and Rich Cohen and other Simpson leaders managed to bring William Kunstler, notorious attorney for the Chicago Seven, to speak on campus in April of 1970. Again, a backlash from Indianola condemning the inept Simpson administration, and perhaps best summarized by Bill Bowles, Indianola native and Iowa director of selective service, who argued that Kunstler and his ilk would undermine the very constitutional rights that enabled him to speak. Simpson does not need Kunstler and his like, neither does Indianola. In fact, while expressing fear that the country was on the road to revolution, Kunstler counseled the audience of perhaps 1,000 against violence and placed the anti-war movement in the tradition of the American Revolution. Less than a month later, on May 4th, 4 students were killed at Kent State University by National Guardsmen, called out after a building had been burned down by protesters on the normally staid campus. Outrage ensued at Simpson and across the nation. Rich Cohen wrote, "At Simpson, finally, we had everybody's attention. Across the country, colleges were closing down in protest, and Simpson student leaders demanded that we do the same so that students could take to the streets, knock on doors, and convince Americans that the war in Vietnam must end." On the morning of Friday, May 9th, 700 to 800 crosses appeared on campus to commemorate Iowans who had died in Vietnam. More than 300 students attended a peace rally, and a faculty meeting was called for 4 p.m. to take up student demands to close the school. Great Hall was packed, and intense debate ensued, with most students pressing to close. I remember only one courageous female student who spoke against the measure, saying she had paid for her education and it should not be taken away from her. The faculty resisted student pressure and voted against closing the school, angering student leadership. But faculty, led by Joe Walt, Bill Helfrich, and Todd Lieber, called for another meeting where a compromise was reached. Individual students who wished to lobby against the war could negotiate with their teachers, who were encouraged to give them their current grade or work out completion of coursework later. In addition, Simpson College would send a delegation of students, faculty, and administrators to Washington to carry the student message to their representatives. Some idealistic students did take up the offer and knocked on Indianola doors, only to find that the enemy was not the faculty and the administration, but public opinion, which saw demonstrations against the war as unpatriotic and un-American. By any standard, 1969-70 was an exhilarating year. The editors of the Zenith reflected generously on the role of President Ralph John and the changes that occurred. Quote, "A good school needs good leadership, and Ralph C. John has served Simpson well in his 6 years as president. During President John's term of office, Simpson has seen a new library, student center, chapel, and dormitory, and a nearly completed fine arts center. Students have seen the abolition of women's hours, admission of students to faculty meetings, abolition of all academic requirements, the establishment of an Afro-American student center, and countless other benefits of insightful leadership. To Dr. John, we owe the honor of our gratitude and the strength of our support." Unquote. But outside of Simpson, many did not see it that way. Joe Walt cites a businessman from Sheraton who wrote in 1972, quote, that Simpson was reputed to have declining academic standards, a radicalized student body, severe racial tensions, and few, if any, behavioral rules or regulations, because it kowtows to the demands of irresponsible students. He would send his daughter to another, more wholesome college. In fact, after reaching 1,000 students in the fall of 1970, enrollment began to decline to 957 full-time students in 1971, 857 in 1972, and reached a low of 744 in 1977-78. Lowering admission standards to attract more students only lowered Simpson's reputation as an academic institution. High school counselors ceased to recommend Simpson to their best students. Yet grade point averages on campus continued to rise, no doubt partly because students did not have to take courses they were not good at, and because faculty competing with one another without curricular standards could not afford a reputation of being too difficult. Fewer students meant troubling budget deficits, growing from 100,000 in 1972 to 300,000 in 73, and almost 500,000 in 1973-74. Budget deficits meant minuscule increases in salary, and even a salary freeze in 74-75, leading to a steep decline in faculty morale. Those who could found employment elsewhere. Midwestern College in Denison, Iowa had declared bankruptcy in 1970, and Parsons College in Fairfield did the same in 1973. And there was real concern among the faculty about Simpson's future. By 1974, 5 faculty had to be let go, and attrition had reduced the numbers of faculty from 72 in 1970 to 56 in 1977. Maintenance had also been put off. Old Chapel was in such disrepair that it was closed and boarded up, becoming an eyesore in the middle of campus, destined to be demolished. The situation was so bad that some of us, unable to find jobs elsewhere, began to prepare for the worst. I took education courses from E.G. Booth, anticipating a return to high school teaching, where the pay was better and the jobs more secure. And my friend Todd Lieber started a biology course, considering a career in veterinary medicine. By 1978, with the situation dire, President Richard Lancaster left, and Simpson began the task of finding a new president. Okay. With faculty morale low and the number of students dwindling, the Simpson Board of Trustees made an interesting decision regarding the search for a new president. They included both faculty and student representatives on the search committee and allowed them to report back to faculty and student committees. They stipulated that all 3 groups had to approve the final candidate for president. All agreed that whoever was to be in charge must be able to address the budget situation. And the search came up with 2 candidates, a business manager from another Midwestern college and 55-year-old Robert E. McBride, Dean of Academic Affairs at Albright College in Pennsylvania, with a PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago, 12 years of teaching, and experience in nearly every area of administration. While the faculty preferred McBride, given the desperate economic situation, we were open to the appointment of the business manager. The students, under the leadership of their president, Gary Streety, were not. They insisted that McBride was the only acceptable choice. The trustees had hoped to find a younger candidate, but after a physical examination to satisfy them that he was fit to be the kind of vigorous leader they had hoped to see in a younger man, and with McBride's challenge to the trustees that they hire him for 1 year and fire him if he did not satisfy them, McBride was hired. McBride benefited from 2 hires by Richard Lancaster. Oh, pressing the wrong button. John Kellogg, director of admissions, had made the counterintuitive proposition that for Simpson to increase enrollment and reputation, it needed to turn down weaker applicants to the college, a position that McBride quickly affirmed. And Kellogg, a former Marine, also policed the college grounds to make sure that prospective students and their parents found it attractive and inviting. And Roger Bettesworth, hired as college chaplain, had served for 1 year as dean of students and began the hiring of professional counselors in the dormitories. Bettesworth was also a key figure in McBride's efforts to reestablish the college's frayed relationship with the Methodist Church, which in turn began to affirm Simpson for Methodist students. McBride's first challenge was the deficit, which had risen from $300,000 when he was interviewed to nearly $650,000 by the time he began the job. He first initiated a spending freeze, which required that any expenditure more than $50 be personally approved by the president. He was a big, bluff, physically challenging man, so that few had the temerity to ask. He then took advantage of a new state law that allowed him to use the credit of the city of Indianola to restructure the loans for the building of Cole Center with its swimming pool. And he greatly reduced the interest rate and monthly cost of the college. Then, to enhance income, he proposed the creation of an evening program. But rather than look outside Simpson for leadership, he turned to Tom Westbrook, a housing director at Simpson, to create a program. Tom would have the complete support of the president and 3 years to produce additional income for the college. If he failed, there'd be no job. Faculty scoffed as Westbrook's billboards appeared around Des Moines saying, "You take the class, we pay the gas." To the surprise of everyone, they came, adding 87 students the first semester in 1981, more than 150 by the second semester, and rising above 500 later, and established a crucial boost to the college budget. McBride was very much a community builder. Overcome divisions among the faculty and regain trust in the administration, he proposed a change in the way the contracts would be done. He argued that if faculty would treat their March contracts as tentative with only modest raises, he would be able to give larger ones in September if student enrollment increased. In other words, his philosophy was a rising tide lifts all boats, that faculty and staff should all work to make Simpson an attractive place, that we should work together rather than in competition. He then offered a one-time Christmas bonus of $250 to show what he could do and convinced us to accept his challenge. Under the new system, he increased enrollment and salaries, doubling some salaries over the 7 years of his presidency. In a further effort toward community, he brought in the redoubtable Suzanne Miller from the business office, rather than seeking an outside professional to head the human relations office, and gave her the task of improving community morale. McBride would prowl the campus, stopping in unexpectedly to show people he was interested in what they were doing. He would report back to Suzanne when he sensed problems and urged her to find ways to help. At the same time, he encouraged the creation of community experiences ranging from pig roasts, faculty and staff softball games, picnics, and Christmas dinners, where he and Lou were mercilessly satirized by Bob Lane and Cole Zimmerman. Simpson had always offered free tuition to the children of faculty and staff to attend the college, but McBride enrolled the college in a national consortium of liberal arts institutions that enabled us to afford broader opportunities for our children. McBride also put his stamp on Simpson academics. Before his arrival, with the leadership of Bruce Haddix, efforts had been made to restore curricular guidance to students, beginning with a modest but controversial Quest for Identity program, then an interdisciplinary freshman studies requirement, and finally the proposal of a 21-hour distributive studies requirement. McBride said it was not good enough. Increase the requirements and add a senior capstone course. With that challenge, we created what John Kellogg named the Cornerstone Studies program. 2 courses in the Western tradition the first year, 3 courses in the humanities, 2 in social science, and 2 in natural science by the end of the second year, a minority perspective course to show the flaws of the Western tradition in the junior year, and McBride's senior colloquium, though not perhaps as he imagined it. This curriculum would define the Simpson academic experience for the next 25 years. At his heart, McBride was an academic. He seemed to have loved nothing more than attending lectures by prominent speakers. And inviting all there who were interested to the president's house for refreshments and to meet the guests. Invariably, students, faculty, and interested town people would gather around the fireplace at Carpenter House, and McBride would turn to the visitor and say, "Professor so-and-so, I enjoyed your talk, but I have a question." And so we would begin a thoughtful conversation going deep into the evening. It was in this spirit that he founded and helped to fund the McBride Lectures. McBride was also extremely competitive, and it embarrassed him that the Simpson football team continued its losing ways. So on the advice of John Sirianni, who he had made athletic director, he brought in James Williams as football coach. After one losing season, Williams turned the Redmen, to be renamed the Storm, from a conference doormat to a football juggernaut and athletic power for the next 10 years. One troubling problem for McBride was what to do with derelict old chapel, boarded up and decaying, useless, expensive to renovate, opened only for an occasional ghost hunt. Almost everyone among faculty, staff, and administration thought it must be raised, but students felt an emotional attachment to what Dan Doyle called an old friend, which he communicated in a speech to the Board of Trustees. A few of those trustees, most notably Luther Hill, Bob Picken, who had met his wife on the steps of Old Chapel, and Michael Gardner set out to, quote unquote, save it, unquote. When John Kellogg and Bill Geiger suggested that they could use the building for admissions and student aid, Old Chapel was saved. McBride had the additional idea to connect fundraising for Old Chapel with the renovation of Maryberry Hall in the historical Anchorage project that turned symbols of despair into distinguished symbols of tradition. A final symbol of the college's turnaround came on past Campus Day, 1987. McBride, administration, staff, faculty, and students spent that beautiful April morning laying sod, cleaning bricks, cleaning up the campus, then shared a picnic lunch and enjoyed an afternoon in the sun, many watching the Simpson baseball team take a doubleheader from Central. It just so happened that two representatives of the Council of Independent Colleges were on campus that morning, following up on a national survey of college faculty that sought to discover organizational structures that enhanced faculty morale. Simpson faculty responses to the survey placed the college among the top 10. The CIC team was doing follow-up interviews. Almost without exception, they found positive responses. One administrator commented, "The college was on its butt in 1979. McBride put the college on its feet." More than one faculty member said Simpson was a good school, getting better all the time. Students commonly reported that people care about you here. Many praised the heavily symbolic role of the restoration of College Hall. Beyond this, observed Joe Watt, quoting the team saw a campus looking prosperous and well kept, a faculty whose morale was even higher than they had anticipated, a community with powerful loyalty to the institution, to each other, and to a firm leader. President McBride emerges as the popular organizational leader hero. I had occasion one time to ask McBride how he had come to his career in higher education. He told a story from his experience in World War II. He and another stretcher bearer had dived into a foxhole to avoid enemy shelling. He survived the shelling. The man on the other end of his stretcher did not. McBride said he felt he must have been saved for some higher purpose. Perhaps that higher purpose was to save a small Methodist liberal arts college in Indianola, Iowa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Owen. And now we will open it up to questions that you might have. And I will pull up, it looks like we have one that has been posed thus far. What are your fondest memories of the history department and other faculty colleagues? Your enduring fan, Steve Shire.
Oh, yeah, I remember Steve well. He's actually taught some history for us, if I remember correctly. It sort of was a student leader and went on to have a great career as a political scientist. So I don't know. There's a lot of memories in those early days, trying to get on with Helfrich, who was the wild man on campus, and it was tricky working with Joe and Bill in those days, and Richard Dusenberry and Gary Ballin. So it was a great group. Not very much of an answer, but.
All right, it looks like Sue, you've raised your hand. If you have a question, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and then type in the question, and that will be delivered to us. We'll wait just a few minutes to see if any other questions come in. Did you enjoy coaching the Simpson tennis team?
I did. Who was that?
John Lawler.
Yeah, and I was going to mention John was in I think that first Western Civ class, along with Cole Zimmerman, if I remember correctly. And let's see, I remember Patty Roush, who we all tried to teach to because she was so enthusiastic. We figured if we'd gotten Patty's attention, we were doing okay. So yeah, John, those were good days. I coached men's tennis for 5 years and women's tennis for 5 years, and learned that in a closed van after a match, Everything smells the same, men or women.
All right, we have another question. What is your view of the course of Simpson post McBride?
Uh, I wasn't happy when they moved away from the Cornerstone Studies program, which we spent a lot of time on. Other than that, I mean, the campus is gorgeous. The faculty is great. It's still a very good place, and I just live across the street, walk it every day. So, like I say, and it's been 15 years since I worked here, so I don't really know the issues that they're facing, but I'm sure that's part of the point of the past as a foreign country. I'm sure everything's different now and needs different solutions.
Sounds great. Ann Peterson asks, what are you most proud of in your career?
Well, I know, I'm not sure how people take all that discussion of curriculum, but that was the thing I was most involved in. I don't know whether you could get the point of how radical the situation was when it was sort of accepted that there would be no liberal arts requirements. In fact, it worries me that some level that's going on now, or that liberal arts requirements get reduced to social justice as opposed to some broader challenging tradition of academics. So no, I guess my work in curriculum was what I was most proud of.
Dwayne Lookingbill says,
Oh, Dwayne.
I am class of 1979. I had no idea all of this was going on. Are you publishing this kind of history?
Well, this is all in Joe Walt's history. if under the whispering maples, beneath the whispering maples, it's about 700 pages, I think. But if you want to look up what was going on when you were at Simpson, go to the end. It's got a terrific index. And as a matter of fact, with a shout out to Sid Dyer, our archivist, you can actually read it online. If you go to the archives, you can find the book. I think the books have all been sold, but it is available online, and you can put a search in for your name or for what's going on in your years, and find out what's happening.
Just Done states, thanks for sharing, Owen. Great memories. Always enjoyed work study with Karen. What is the biggest change at Simpson in the past 10 years within education?
Education now is, it's becoming a political issue. I don't know about at Simpson, but in general, there's the cultural struggle. And one of the big issues, of course, is the social justice issue and the need to rewrite American history. I grew up with learning the lost cause story of America, and that was just a false story. And it's essential that we tell the true story, which includes the fact that slavery was bad, segregation was bad, that Black people have been worked against, and we need a history that recognizes their contributions, their suffering, and their contributions to the country. And it's not about critical race theory; it's about just telling the truth about history.
That somewhat segues into a question from John Darlington. Would you comment on racial tensions in Indianola related to African American students on campus? Have things improved over the years?
Well, for a lot, there were actually more. Well, I don't know what it is now, but there were like 75 African Americans at Simpson in those times. In 1972, I didn't talk about this. They were demanding Black studies courses of Black professors and so on. And they did a demonstration, they got some recognition, and then the coverage went away. So they called the local TV network and said, why aren't you covering us? And the network said, or the local station said, you're not doing anything. So they took over the student center, which got us all kinds of negative publicity. But in fact, I mean, they didn't were harsh, but they were frustrated. And I think things are better now. I don't know how many minority students Simpson now has, but my sense is that things are better, at least in the academic world. Well, things are better. I grew up in a segregated society in West Virginia. I attended segregated schools till I was 16. So there are important ways. Things are certainly better.
We have the next question from Megan Sybil. This has been lovely. Thank you so much, Owen. I feel like I've been transported back to Maryberry 2003. How optimistic or not do you feel about the future of post-secondary education in Iowa in general and at Simpson in particular?
Well, again, it's been 15 years. I remember Megan well, and great student. These are difficult times, and I'm hoping that there can be some moderation achieved, and people start talking to each other. I'm a fan of Joe Biden. I supported Joe Biden going back to 1988 when he first ran. I think he's got the right idea of trying to find a middle path, and I hope he succeeds. I hope we succeed. I wish nothing but the best for Simpson, which is still a great place.
And Bruce Haddix has asked, could you talk about the role of history in liberal arts?
Coffee's over, Bruce. Well, obviously, I think history is central to the liberal arts. Getting to your roots, testing. I mean, we're still, struggling with fulfilling the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, trying to bring social justice and equality to everybody. And I don't think you can do that without looking at the past. Bruce and I and others have been reading on 19th century American history. And again, I say it's crucial that people know that history and try to do something to bring about the sort of society that our founders promised us.
Okay, a question from Maria Landmesser. I'm so glad I was able to catch this. Loved having you as my advisor and working for Karen. Some of my favorite parts of my Simpson experience. Do you have a favorite campus day memory?
Well, the one I talked about, I suppose, was the favorite. And I want to comment, since you mentioned Karen, my wife was in charge of the phones at Simpson, among many other things, and had something like 20 students working for her. And she knew more about what was going on campus than I did. She was always in touch with students, and she loved Simpson and often straightened me out on issues that I thought I knew, but she knew better because she was actually in touch with students.
How long did you do the program with Haddix and Lieber?
3 years. Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't put that out. We did history, American studies, and enduring questions. And the only requirement was if the students took one of those courses, they had to take the other two, meet on Thursday night for an extra 2 hours. So it was not like something that was going to attract a lot of them. But then we talked about what those three subjects had in common, and spent a lot of time on community and imagination. Needless to say, the organizer of this was Bruce Haddix.
And one final question, and that is, what were your favorite classes to teach?
Well, I did British history, and those were probably my favorite. But I enjoyed teaching the senior colloquium. We did a course on the American family. It's not quite the right title, But it was a great course because several of us worked on it together, contributed books and ideas, and it was fun to do. And Bruce and I, John Epperson, Bill Fredericks. I'm leaving people out, but I really enjoyed the senior colloquium.
All right. Well, we have come to our time frame today, and thank you all so very much for joining us. And Owen, true Simpson legend, and thank you for your presentation today. It was wonderful, and we greatly appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody.